Elena Voss had learned to run without making a sound. 3 weeks of practice had taught her which floorboards creaked, which car doors slammed too loud, and how to carry a sleeping 6-year-old for miles without waking him. Tonight, none of that skill mattered. The gravel road behind the old Miller farmhouse offered no cover, no shortcut, no place left to hide. She had chosen this route because the map on her phone showed a straight line to the highway, and the highway meant a bus station, and the bus station meant somewhere far away from everything that had gone wrong. She had not counted on the 3 men waiting near the fence line, arms crossed, watching the road like they had known exactly where she would walk. "Evening, Elena," the tallest one said. His name was Dren, and she recognized him from the wedding 4 years ago, back when her husband still introduced her proudly to his pack, as if she belonged there. "Long way from home." "We don't have a home anymore," she said, pulling Milo closer against her hip. He was awake now, his small hand fisted in the fabric of her jacket, his breathing quick and shallow the way it got when he sensed she was frightened. Children always knew. They knew long before adults wanted them to. "That's not our problem," Dren said. "Your husband owed a debt to the pack. He's gone, so the debt falls to his family. That's how it works. You know that." "He's a child," Elena said, her voice shaking but her spine straight. "Milo has nothing to do with what his father did. Please, take it out on me if you have to, but please leave my baby alone." The second man, younger and clearly uneasy, shifted his weight and looked at the ground. The third said nothing at all. Only Dren stepped forward, slow and deliberate, the kind of walk meant to make a person feel small. "We're not going to hurt him," Dren said, though something in his tone did not match the words. "We just need him to come with us. Consider it collateral until the debt's settled." "No." Elena dropped to her knees right there in the gravel, wrapping both arms around her son, as if her body alone could stop 3 grown men. Milo pressed his face into her shoulder, and she felt him trembling, and something in her chest broke apart and reformed as pure, desperate resolve. "You're not taking him. You'll have to go through me." Dren crouched down until he was eye level with her, and for a moment, his expression flickered with something almost like pity. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." That was when the night changed. It was not loud, there was no crash of thunder, no dramatic entrance with fanfare. It was a low sound, more felt than heard, rolling across the clearing like the ground itself had exhaled. All 3 men went still. Dren's pity vanished, replaced instantly by something Elena had never expected to see on his face. Fear. From the tree line at the edge of the property, a figure stepped into the moonlight. He did not hurry. He did not need to. Each step seemed to pull the air tighter around him, and by the time Elena could make out his face, she understood, without being told, exactly who he was. Alpha Cale Ashworth. She had heard his name whispered in careful, respectful tones her entire life, the way people speak of storms and mountains, things too large to argue with. He ruled the Northern Territories, the oldest and most powerful pack in the region, and he almost never left his own land. Yet here he was, walking toward a stretch of gravel road on the edge of nowhere, his gold eyes fixed on the 3 men standing over a kneeling woman and a frightened child. "Alpha Cale," Dren stammered, dropping into a bow so quickly his knees hit the stone with an audible crack. "We didn't realize you were nearby. This isn't your territory. We were only collecting a debt, I asked you a question with my presence," Cale said, and his voice was quiet, almost gentle, which somehow made it more frightening than if he had shouted. "Why is there a child on the ground in front of you?" Nobody answered. The younger man would not meet his eyes. The third simply stared at the dirt. Cale's gaze moved past them, settling on Elena and Milo. Something shifted in his face when he saw the boy's trembling shoulders, the way Elena's arms were locked around him like iron bands. For just a moment, the cold command in his expression cracked, and underneath it, Elena glimpsed something raw and old, a wound that had never quite closed. Then it was gone, and the command returned, sharper than before. "You have 5 seconds," Cale said, "to decide whether you walk away from this clearing or whether you don't walk away from it at all." Nobody needed 5 seconds. The 3 men were gone before he finished speaking, melting into the tree line as if they had never existed, leaving only the sound of their retreating footsteps and then silence. Elena did not move. She stayed on her knees in the gravel, arms still locked around Milo, unsure whether the danger had actually passed or simply changed its shape into something taller and far more powerful. Cale approached slowly, and when he was still several feet away, he lowered himself into a crouch, making himself smaller, less imposing, careful not to loom over them. "You're safe now," he said. "Both of you. I promise you that." "Why would you help us?" Elena whispered. Her voice cracked on the last word. "You don't know me. You don't know my son." Cale's jaw tightened. For a long moment he said nothing, and when he finally spoke, his voice had dropped lower, quieter, as if the words cost him something. 10 years ago, I was a boy about his age, he said, nodding slightly toward Milo, without ever taking his eyes off Elena. My family owed a debt too. Nobody stepped out of the shadows for us. I remember exactly what it feels like to be small and terrified, and have no one come. He paused. That ends tonight. Not for him. Not while I'm standing here. Something about the honesty in his voice, the total absence of performance, made Elena's tightly held control finally give way. Tears spilled down her face, silent and exhausted, 3 weeks of fear finally finding an exit. Milo lifted his head slightly from her shoulder, studying the stranger with the careful, searching eyes that children use when deciding whether an adult can be trusted. Cale did not reach for the boy. He simply extended his hand, palm up, and waited. He did not rush him, did not coax him, did not perform patience the way some adults do while secretly running out of it. He simply waited, as if he had all the time in the world, as if nothing else mattered more than letting a frightened child make his own choice. After a long moment, Milo's small fingers slipped free of his mother's jacket and settled into Cale's open palm. "Hi," Milo said, his voice small but steady. "Are you really a king?" "Something like that," Cale said, the corner of his mouth lifting into the first real smile Elena had seen on him. "Though I think you might outrank me. Kings don't usually get this brave this fast." Milo managed a small, watery laugh, and Elena felt something in her chest loosen for the first time in 3 weeks. "Come with me," Cale said, rising to his feet and helping Elena up with his free hand. "Both of you. My territory has room for 2 more, and nobody there will ever ask you to hand over your son as payment for someone else's mistakes." Elena hesitated, old instincts warning her that trust was a luxury she could no longer afford, that every kindness in her recent life had come with hidden conditions. Cale seemed to read the hesitation in her face. "You don't have to decide anything tonight," he said gently. "Come and rest. Eat something warm. In the morning, if you want to leave, no one will stop you. I only ask that you let me make sure you're both safe until then." It was the "no one will stop you" that finally convinced her. Every trap she had encountered in the past 3 weeks had promised safety while quietly closing the exits. This was the first offer that left the door open. "Okay," she said softly. "Just for tonight." They walked together toward the tree line, Milo's hand still resting in Cale's, Elena close beside them. As they moved deeper into the trees, shapes began to emerge from the shadows, wolves stepping silently out of the darkness on either side of the path. Elena tensed, but Cale's voice cut through her fear before it could take hold. "They're not a threat," he said. "They're an escort. Word travels fast in a pack. Everyone already knows a child needed protecting tonight, and everyone showed up to make sure it happened." Sure enough, the wolves kept a respectful distance, moving alongside them like a silent honor guard rather than closing in like predators. Milo, wide-eyed but no longer trembling, watched them with open fascination instead of fear. "Can I pet one?" he whispered. "Ask them yourself," Cale said. "They understand more than people think." By the time they reached the main house at the heart of Cale's territory, a sprawling stone building with warm lights glowing in every window, Elena felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in weeks, the beginning of safety. A woman near the entrance, introduced simply as Mira, took one look at the 3 of them and immediately ushered them inside, calling for blankets and hot food without being asked twice. Elena sat at a long wooden table a short while later, watching Milo eat soup like he hadn't seen a proper meal in days, which, she realized with a pang of guilt, he mostly hadn't. Cale sat across from them, not hovering, not pressing for information, simply present, as if his job for the evening was only to make sure nothing else went wrong. "You don't have to explain anything tonight," he said, when he caught her studying him. "But when you're ready, I'd like to understand what happened. Not because I need a reason to protect you. I've already decided that. I'd like to know, because I want to help make sure it never happens again." Elena set down her spoon, looked at her son, safe and warm, and finally still, and felt the last of her defenses ease. "His father made choices I didn't know about," she said quietly. "By the time I found out, it was too late to undo any of it. I only found out the debt existed when men started showing up at our door." She glanced at Cale. "I've been running ever since. I didn't know where else to go." "You don't have to run anymore," Cale said. "Not from this. My territory doesn't answer to the Cade Pack, and even if it did, I would not honor a debt collected against a child." "Why does this matter so much to you?" Elena asked. "You said something earlier, about being that boy once." Cale was quiet for a moment, his eyes drifting to Milo, who had fallen asleep sitting upright, his head slowly tipping toward the table. "My father owed a debt to a rival pack. When I was 7, they came to collect, and there was no alpha strong enough or willing enough to stand in the way. I remember hiding under a table, while grown men argued over what I was worth." His jaw tightened briefly. "I promised myself, if I was ever in a position to stop that from happening to someone else, I would. Tonight, I finally got the chance." Elena reached across the table, and without quite deciding to, rested her hand over his. "Thank you," she said, "for stepping out of the shadows." Cale looked down at her hand, then up at her face, something unreadable and quietly hopeful passing behind his eyes. "Thank you for trusting me enough to let me." Mira gently lifted the sleeping Milo and carried him toward a guest room prepared earlier that evening, blankets already turned down, a small stuffed wolf sitting on the pillow, as if the household had known, somehow, that a child would need comforting tonight. Elena watched him go, then turned back to Cale. "I don't know what happens next," she admitted. "I don't know how any of this works." "Neither do I, entirely," Cale said, with a small, honest laugh. "I've never done this before, but I know this much. You and your son are safe here for as long as you need. There's no debt attached to that. No condition. Just safety." Outside, the wolves that had escorted them through the forest settled quietly around the edges of the property, keeping watch through the night. Inside, for the first time in 3 weeks, Elena Voss allowed herself to close her eyes, without listening for footsteps, without counting exits, without holding her breath. In the morning, sunlight spilled gently across the guest room, where Milo slept peacefully, the small stuffed wolf tucked under his arm. Elena stood in the doorway, watching him, and felt something steady begin to take root inside her chest, something that felt, cautiously and carefully, like hope. Down in the kitchen, Cale was already awake, speaking quietly with Mira about arrangements for the days ahead, about schools and safety, and the quiet business of rebuilding a life torn apart by someone else's mistakes. When he saw Elena in the doorway, he simply smiled, warm and unguarded, an alpha king who had once been a frightened boy, now standing exactly where he had always wished someone had stood for him. "Good morning," he said. "Sleep all right?" "Better than I have in weeks," Elena admitted. "Good," Cale said. "Because you're not running anymore. Not while I'm here." And for the first time since everything had fallen apart, Elena believed him completely.